It wasn't supposed to be like this. Britain, home of parliamentary order, centuries-old traditions, and stoic composure, now found itself shaken at its very core. On a rainy afternoon in Westminster, something snapped. The House of Commons, usually a theatre of controlled chaos, erupted into something darker. A raw, unfiltered brawl. And at the centre of it all stood one man, Nigel Farage. He hadn't even taken a seat as an MP, yet his mere presence during Prime Minister's questions was enough to shatter the fragile civility that Parliament clung to. As the cameras rolled, MPs heckled. One shouted, "Will you shut up?" Another, "You don't belong here." It was more than just a clash of personalities. It was a symptom, a warning sign, of something deeper. Because this wasn't about Nigel Farage. Not really. This was about a country tearing at its seams. About a ruling class losing its grip. About a people no longer willing to be governed in silence. For years, the UK has drifted from one crisis to the next: Brexit, austerity, pandemic, inflation, energy shocks. And now, just as voters hoped for stability under a new Labour government, they're met with shouting matches and parliamentary mutiny. Is this democracy, or its slow collapse? Outside Westminster, millions watched the footage and felt something unsettling. Some cheered. Some raged. But most just stared and asked themselves, what the hell is happening to Britain? We are a country divided not just by politics, but by perception. By region, by class, by ideology. And now, for the first time in decades, it feels like the centre might not hold. He wasn't elected. He wasn't even meant to speak. But he didn't have to. Nigel Farage's presence alone, a smirk in the gallery, a single raised brow, was enough to send shockwaves through the chamber. To some MPs, he's a clown. To others, a danger. But to millions of Britons outside Westminster, he is a voice, loud, unapologetic, and increasingly credible. When Farage returned to frontline politics, many dismissed it as a publicity stunt. Yet weeks later, he is polling ahead of the Liberal Democrats, outflanking the Conservatives in several regions, and has managed to make his party, Reform UK, impossible to ignore. His moment in the House of Commons wasn't accidental. It was theatre. It was war paint. It was a warning. The establishment no longer owns the stage. When Labour swept into power, the narrative was supposed to shift, competence restored, decency back in fashion. But Farage has sensed what many politicians refuse to admit. That under the surface, Britain is still angry. Still disillusioned. Still waiting for someone, anyone, to say what they're really feeling. In many ways, his entrance into Parliament was less about a seat, and more about a siege. He came not to debate, but to disrupt. Not to legislate, but to challenge the legitimacy of the very system itself. And in doing so, he struck a nerve. Because for the average British voter, politics no longer feels like a service, it feels like a show. Elites speaking to each other. Broken promises stacked upon broken promises. Then comes a man who says, they're all the same. It's time to tear it down. You don't have to like Farage to understand why that message lands. You just have to open your gas bill, or wait 8 hours at A&E, or try renting a flat in London on minimum wage. This isn't just a Farage moment. This is a Farage-shaped hole in our politics, carved by years of institutional failure. And the longer Westminster mocks him, the more powerful he becomes. The House of Commons has seen shouting matches before. It survived walkouts, resignations, even fistfights. But this time felt different. This wasn't just political theatre. It was panic. The jeers thrown at Nigel Farage weren't merely expressions of disagreement. They were symptoms of a deeper fear, a fear that the walls of the establishment are no longer holding. MPs who once commanded respect now find themselves booed in their own chambers. Ministers whisper behind closed doors, fearful not of the opposition, but of their own crumbling authority. For years, Parliament operated on the illusion of control. That votes were sacred. That norms were unshakable. that Britain's democracy, however flawed, was stable. But in the age of populism and protest, control is an illusion. The heckling that erupted during Prime Minister's questions wasn't spontaneous, it was a pressure valve bursting open. Backbenchers lashing out, not just at Farage, but at the public anger he represents. Because behind those green benches, many MPs know the truth. The public doesn't trust them. The media doesn't fear them. And their parties are at war with themselves. Labour, despite its recent landslide, is already facing dissent from unions, from local councils, even from within its own ranks. The Conservatives? A shattered shell of their former selves. Leaderless. Directionless. Humiliated. And now Reform UK, once considered a protest party, is polling in the double digits, snapping at the heels of a weakened right. In the past, Parliament was the fortress of British democracy. Now, it feels like a battleground of egos and ideologies, with no one in full control. And the public sees it. They see the snide remarks. The performative outrage. The empty rows on Fridays. The shouting matches on Wednesdays. So when the people watch MPs screaming at Farage for simply sitting in a seat, they are not thinking, that's outrageous. They're thinking, that's all they ever do, shout and protect their own. And slowly, dangerously, the moral authority of Parliament continues to erode. If Britain was a ship, then Westminster is the deck, cracking under its own weight, while the storm builds just beyond the horizon. Once upon a time, British politics lived in the middle. Elections were won not by the extremes, but by those who could walk the tightrope of the centre ground, balancing economy with empathy, progress with caution, and ideology with pragmatism. But not anymore. Today, the centre is bleeding. And no one seems to be rushing to save it. Labour may sit in power, but its position is far from secure. Keir Starmer speaks of moderation, stability, and responsibility, but many voters hear compromise, hesitation, and a lack of conviction. The Conservatives, meanwhile, have lost more than just votes. They've lost their soul. Years of internal chaos, broken promises, and ideological whiplash have left them adrift, with no identity to speak of. And in that vacuum comes the noise. Reform UK. Far-right whisper networks. Leftist insurgencies. Conspiracy-fueled independence. The new battlefield is not policy. It's anger. The currency is not truth. It's emotion. The prize? The hearts of the disillusioned and the forgotten. The truth is brutal, the centre no longer inspires. For many young people, the idea of centre-left or centre-right feels like a relic, like dial-up internet or the BBC's teletext. It speaks to an era that promised things can only get better, but delivered stagnant wages, unaffordable homes, and NHS waiting lists longer than ever before. So when a figure like Farage shouts into the void, or a union leader calls for a general strike, or a YouTuber starts gathering more political clout than a backbencher, people listen. Not because they believe everything being said, but because they feel something. Anything. In politics today, feelings beat facts. Outrage beats order. And volume beats values. And until someone finds a way to make the centre feel something again, it will continue to fade, lost in the noise, buried beneath the slogans, and forgotten in the comment sections of angry voters. Because this is not just a shift in political allegiance. It's a rejection of politics as we knew it. The Britain that believed in balance is disappearing. And what replaces it might be far more dangerous. So where does this road lead? If you're watching from the outside, it looks like Britain is lurching from one political storm to another. But if you're living inside it, if you're a teacher, a nurse, a cab driver, a small business owner, it doesn't feel like a storm. It feels like a slow-motion collapse. Confidence in institutions is eroding. Parliament is no longer respected. The media is no longer trusted. And politicians? They rank somewhere between estate agents and traffic wardens in public favourability. The country is, in a word, tired. Tired of promises. Tired of spin. Tired of voting for change and getting more of the same. And now, as Britain stares into the face of a new government, an opposition in ruins, and a populist surge snapping at its heels, the question becomes unavoidable. Are we witnessing the death of the Britain we knew? Some argue this is just a phase. That the institutions will adapt. That the centre will hold. That the grown-ups are finally back in charge. But others aren't so sure. When your economy is stagnant. When your unions are striking. When your young people are fleeing. When even your monarch is booed in public. You don't need to be a historian to see the warning signs. Because democracies don't die overnight. They don't vanish in a flash of smoke. They decay, slowly, silently, systematically. And when that decay sets in, there are only two paths left. Collapse. Or reinvention. Reform UK says tear it down. Labour says hold steady. The Tories barely say anything at all. But the public? They're speaking louder than ever, through protests, through votes, through silence. And if the people at the top continue to ignore those voices, then Britain isn't just facing a political crisis. It's facing an identity crisis. Who are we now? What do we stand for? And if this version of Britain no longer works, what comes next? The answers aren't clear. But one thing is, the future of Britain hangs by a thread. And we are all holding it. The shouting in Parliament will fade. The headlines will shift. Nigel Farage will move on to his next stage. And the politicians will go back to their chambers and committee rooms. But something has changed. Something we all saw, maybe for the first time, clearly. That the old rules are no longer sacred. That the centre can crack. That the voices once pushed to the fringe now echo in the heart of Westminster. We're not just watching a political scuffle. We're witnessing a struggle for Britain's soul. For what it means to lead. For what it means to represent. For whether democracy in this country still works for the people who live under it. The danger now isn't just economic uncertainty or political instability. It's apathy. It's the quiet resignation of a public that no longer believes change is possible. It's the shrug that says, they're all the same. The silence that says, what's the point? But maybe, just maybe, that can still be turned around. Maybe this crisis is a wake-up call. Not for the politicians. But for us. For the citizens. For the communities. For the people who have more power than they think, when they choose to use it. So the final question isn't for Farage. Or for Starmer. Or for Parliament. It's for you. Will you watch Britain unravel from the sidelines? Or will you stand up, speak out, and help decide what comes next? Because the future of Britain isn't just in their hands. It's in ours.